Ladies, thanks so much for connecting to me again. I only have 15 minutes with which to do these videos, and so I was getting close to my cutoff. So now I found the right spot that we need to be at where Frankenstein passes. Okay, so we're looking at this is still in the final section. You'll see the break where it says Walton in continuation in your books. That's where I want you to be picking up to. Okay, so we're still looking at how Shelley resolves the conflict within the novel, and that's one of our focuses in our learning goal, and I'll put that all online for you. But here we have, okay, so we know that Frankenstein has scoured the globe looking for the monster and has made his way to Antarctica where Walton is, where he comes across Walton. His final words before his death is, when will my guiding spirit in conducting me to the demon allow me the rest I so much desire, or must I die and he yet live? If I do, swear to me, Walton, that he shall not escape, and that you will seek him and satisfy my vengeance to his death. And do I dare ask of you to undertake my pilgrimage, to endure the hardships that I have undergone? No, I am not so selfish. Yet, when I am dead, if he should appear, if the ministers of vengeance should conduct him to you, swear that he shall not live, swear that he shall not triumph over my accumulated woes and survive to add to the list of his dark crimes. Right, so really, he's saying to Walton, please continue my duty to this vengeance that I have. I've taken a vow, and we saw that in the last video. He takes a vow, and all the spirits of those who are murdered by the monster, they're all there, and so he feels that this is like a blood oath. This is something that he has vowed to do, and he feels strongly and powerful about that, and so he passes it on to Walton, but then says, no, I don't actually, I'm not that selfish, but if you do see him, then you need to kill him. And even he offers a warning to Walton, which I find really interesting. He is eloquent and persuasive, and once his words even had power over my heart. Not really sure that they did. Not sure if it was the power of his words that made him, choose to create the mate, or fear for his threat. But anyway, they'll leave that up for you guys to decide and think over what your opinion is. Did Frankenstein ever truly trust the monster, or did the monster persuade him? Think about that. So once his words had power over my heart, but trust him not. His soul is as hellish as his form. Ooh. Ouch. Okay, full of treachery and fiend-like malice. Hear him not. Call on the names of William, Justine, Clerval, Elizabeth, my father, and the wretched Victor, and thrust your sword into his heart. I will hover near and direct the steel aright. I love how Shelley is using both all of this biblical imagery of Adam and the Creator and this allusion to God and His creation, and yet also bringing in this idea of the dead and the spirits and hovering, and having some control. Like here, in death, Frankenstein will hover and direct the steel aright. He's saying that I'll be around, and I'm going to be haunting this moment. I'm going to have power over and vengeance over him. So again, I'll just go back to he says, I wouldn't ask that of you. I'm not so selfish, Walton, for you to continue my vengeance. And yet he does say, but if you see him, thrust your sword into his heart. So again, what has Frankenstein actually learnt about the nature of ambition? Because still here he dies, and the last thing that he has on his breath is to pass that ambition on to Walton, to see that ambition fulfilled, to not worry about Walton's domestic duty. It's really interesting because then we Walton in continuation. So we know that Frankenstein has died at this point, and we continue the letters now, and so we come back to this close of the framing narrative of the epistolary form. Okay, epistolary form, and here we have a little bit of Walton having to justify that he believes that Frankenstein's tale, as terrific and strange as it is true. He's put all the evidence together, he's tested it, and he feels confident that it is true. And he talks about how sometimes I endeavoured to gain from Frankenstein the particulars of his creature's form, but on this point he was impenetrable, saying, "Are you mad, my friend?" said he. "Or whither does your senseless curiosity lead you?" I think this is hilarious that Shelley has this, this moment where Frankenstein is questioning Walton and his motives. What are you talking about? Why would your senseless curiosity lead you here? Would you also create for yourself and the world a demonical enemy? Peace, peace, learn my miseries and do not seek to increase your own. Funny that he said that, obviously, to Walton before he dies, and yet we've just had him swear that he will kill his monster and take that on. So this is where I want to ask the question: has Frankenstein resolved the conflict within himself? Does he learn the valuable lesson that he says he so clearly is trying to warn Walton to avoid his same mistakes, which we see in this quote here, peace, peace, let my miseries, learn from my miseries and do not increase your own. So does he learn, or is Shelley trying to say here, no, he never comes to a resolution on that? Is this the only text that we'll look at where there is no resolution in the upheaval? There is no resolution to Frankenstein realizing domestic duty is just as important and valuable as ambition is. Is there a resolution? That's my question that I want to put to you, and I want you to comment on in the chat page. Okay. Right. Then Walton goes, talks about how a week passed and he's listened to the strangest tale ever imagined, and his thoughts have been, and feeling of his soul has been drunk up by the interest of my guest. Okay. I just want to go on to where he talks about how Walton, how he grapples with Frankenstein's tale and then reconciling it and resolving it to his own tale. Okay, so we know that he has embarked on this ambitious journey. And he writes to his sister on September the 2nd about how he is encompassed by peril, and he's ignorant as to whether or not he'll ever see England again because of where he is, that he's surrounded by mountains of ice, which there's no escape, and of every moment to crush my vessel. So he's in the same sort of suffering that Frankenstein's in, not knowing whether everything will be okay. And he talks about the brave fellows of whom he persuaded to be his companions. And he says that it's terrible to reflect that the lives of all these men are endangered through me. If we are lost, my mad schemes are the cause. Doesn't that ring a bell with Frankenstein and him realizing that he is his mad schemes that led to the death of all of his loved ones? Okay, so he talks about how then he goes on to say that he sort of contradicts what he says because he talks about how then he has to give in and he has to leave his endeavour. So he's admitting here in this letter on September the 2nd the perils of his voyage and realizing that he could cause the death of all of these men, and yet he talks about the mutiny. Okay, I mentioned the fears I entertained of a mutiny, and he says that this morning, as I sat watching the wan countenance of my friend, his eyes half closed and his limbs hanging listlessly, I was roused by half a dozen of the sailors, who demanded admission into the cabin. They entered, and their leader addressed me. He told me that he and his companions had been chosen by the other sailors to come in deputation to me and to make a requisition which, in justice, I could not refuse. We were immersed in ice and should probably never escape, but they feared that if, as were possible, the ice should dissipate and free passage be opened, I should be rash to continue with my journey and lead them to fresh dangers, after they might happily have surmounted this. They insisted, therefore, that I should engage with a solemn promise that if the vessel should be freed, I would instantly direct my course southwards. Okay, now this speech troubled me, okay? Because he doesn't want to give up his ambition. He hesitates before his answer. When Frankenstein, who at first had been silent, indeed appeared hardly to have force enough to attend, roused himself and said towards the men, he said, "What do you mean? What do you demand of your captain? Are you then so easily turned from your design? Did you not call this a glorious expedition? And wherefore was it glorious? Not because the way was smooth and placid as the South Sea, but it was because it was full of dangers and terror, because now at every new incident your fortitude was to be called forth and courage exhibited, because danger and death surrounded it, and these you were to brave and overcome." So this is what it was called, a glorious, they're saying this is why it was called a glorious and honourable undertaking, because it's the peril of death is there. That's what makes it glorious. And if you were to succeed, then you'll be hailed as the benefactors of your species. And so he says, Frankenstein is now, on his deathbed, now saying to them, you're cowards. Oh, be men, or more than men. Be steady to your purpose, as firm as a rock. This ice is not made of such stuff as your hearts may be. It's mutable and cannot withstand you if you say that it shall not. Do not return to your families with the stigma of disgrace marked on your brows. Return as heroes who have fought and conquered, and who know not what it is to turn their backs on the foe. So again, Frankenstein advocating not for domestic duty, but to fulfill, ambition and to achieve glory. So that's, again, interesting as to what is the resolution for Frankenstein. But on September the 7th, we see that the die is cast, I've consented to return. Thus, my hopes blasted by cowardice and indecision, I come back ignorant and disappointed. Okay, it requires more philosophy than I possess to bear this injustice with patience. So there we see Walton come to the same conclusion as Frankenstein. What ultimately has he learned from hearing Frankenstein and the monster's story? Really, what has he learned? Because he still looks at it as his hopes, his glory is blasted by cowardice and indecision, and he's ignorant and disappointed. It doesn't seem like he has resolved, the conflict within himself as to duty and, domestic duty versus ambition. So I think that's really interesting. I only have a few minutes left. So I want to look at when the monster comes in and talks about how he pitied Frankenstein, and he uses persuasion and abhorred himself, but when he discovered that the author of his existence and of its unspeakable torments dared to hope for happiness, that while he accumulated wretchedness and despair upon me, he sought his own enjoyment of feelings and passions from the indulgence of which I was forever barred, the then impotent of envy and bitter indignation filled me with the insatiable thirst for vengeance. So once he realizes he's going to marry Elizabeth and live happily ever after, the monster, who abhorred himself for his murder of Henry, then decides, no, that's it. I need to go on and I need to complete this. But then realizes that revenge led to his last victim, which was his creator. Then Walton is reminded of the warning that Frankenstein gave him and calls him a wretch. But the monster interrupts him and says, and talks about how he has come to this realization that his ambition was flawed. When I first sought it, it was the love of virtue, the feelings of happiness and affection with which my whole being overflowed. But now that virtue has become to me a shadow, and that happiness and affection had turned into bitter loathing and despair, in what should I seek for sympathy? He's content now with his sufferings, and he realizes that he is yet even that enemy of God and man had friends and associates in his desolation, the fallen angel. Thus, he's talking about the devil, but he's alone. And so it ends with him saying that he is going to he's going to leave and he's going to kill himself and he shall die. And